Welcome to the Self-Healing Revolution, where ancient wisdom and modern science meet. I am your host, Paige Pearman, owner of Love Yourself, an Ayurvedic and integrative wellness center based in Louisville, Kentucky, where I do health coaching, run courses, and also retreats. Today, I'm so excited to invite you to listen in on my very special guest and beloved now fiance, Chris Whitko, and Chris has had a very diverse career as an Air Force veteran, high-tech corporate consultant, holistic health coach, speaker, conscious language facilitator, stage actor, and playwright. As an entrepreneur, he has helped form over a dozen businesses, including a superfood company and later a vegan chefing school. Chris led and ran detoxification and rejuvenation retreats internationally. As a corporate leadership coach, Chris helps business professionals overcome subconscious blocks that are holding them back. He is a problem solver who knows how to get right to the heart of the matter, and he moves individuals and entrepreneurs through hurdles that are keeping them from their highest potential. He is a student of Tantrik wisdom and masculine energy and loves to guide men in an exploration of how to move from the wounded into the healthy masculine. Chris, thank you so much in our final interview
Yes,
with the
yes.
summit. And I just have to say that I didn't pull this summit off by myself. This man has been by my side, making it a successful summit so far. So great appreciation and gratitude for
Absolutely.
all of his help
Absolutely.
behind the scenes. And now you see him in this interview with me, but also he was in the Immortal interview. So thank you.
It's been a pleasure doing this with you, honey, and talking about shadow work. When you're in a relationship, especially a beautiful new one, no matter how good the good is, the shadows come up. So I'm excited to talk about shadow work as a spiritual detox. And I've been leading detoxification programs, as you said in my bio. My bio sounds so impressive when you read it. It's like, wow, that's me.
Yeah, it is you.
I've done a lot of things. I think it's just a factor of I get easily distracted maybe, and I'm so interested in so many things that, I have been, what's the thread that goes through everything I've done has been a consultant in corporate America. I've worked for biotech companies, I've worked for manufacturing industries, I've worked for pharmaceutical companies, Bank of America, so banking, and in all these industries, I've worked with leaders.
Yeah.
And I've had the opportunity to see which kind of leadership works and which doesn't, and I'm amazed that it's kind of counterintuitive. Sometimes the guys who are the worst, the biggest, assholes, have some of the best companies, even though people don't seem to be happy all the time, but like they're making money. And I'm like, what? And so I got really intrigued about the idea of business as a path for spiritual transformation. And that became kind of an obsession of mine, is how can corporate America and business leaders, how can we create a template for personal spiritual evolution? And is that even possible?
Right. Is that even possible?
Is that even possible?
Right. And I think in this day and age and time, we know we've gone through a massive collective shift, and we all know we're headed into a direction of technology, that we're more connected than we've ever been because of technology.
And more disconnected.
And more disconnected. So there's the irony of the connection versus the disconnection. But I believe that companies that don't become, it's just my personal belief, that companies that don't become sustainable and care for their employees and have a conscious leadership mindset, I honestly believe in this new age that they may be left in the dust, because we can't have wasteful cost anymore. We're going through a period of inflation, and people don't have the resources. So they're going to be very picky and choosy about where they spend their money and how. And so I think that we're really primed for this conscious leadership model to take place.
And that's true for several reasons. Actually, the research bears that out, because they've studied some of the top 100 companies of the last 10 years, and what they're seeing is a trend towards the ones that are actually financially being successful are the ones that are having kind of a triple bottom line mentality, which means not just profit, but people and planet. So the triple bottom line is profit, people, and planet. And that's a general way of saying caring about the environment, caring about people, having kind of a mission that is exciting, and somehow taking care of their employees. So all that matters. And it's and the shift from kind of like the boomers to our generation, Gen X, and the millennials, the Gen Zs coming in are really not driven in the same way that kind of the boomers were driven. You know, it was more, you know, I grew up in the 80s, so it was like greed is good, and that whole mentality of you work, you make money, and you buy nice things, and that was kind of the American dream. But what's happening is I think the millennials are, I don't know, they're kind of not in that, and they went through the post 9/11 kind of thing, and then Gen Z's coming in, which are the 25 or so year olds, and they're not having it at all. They're really interested in companies that have meaningful purpose, and you know, what's my path, how am I going to grow, and they don't care about the money in the way that kind of our generation did.
Mhm.
So not only is the market forces pushing towards a more conscious businesses, but the actual employees who want to work there are actually kind of forcing the issue in a certain way. They're just, you know, there's quiet quitting, and there's what is act your wage, which is don't go in above and beyond if you're not getting paid to go above and beyond. That's the whole Gen Z mentality. Whereas us, it was like, I don't care if you're sweeping the floor in the warehouse. Like, do the best job you can do and go above, you know, get there early, leave late, all this mentality. So the whole consciousness of business is shifting, and that's requiring, and that's what I'm interested in, that's requiring the leadership to take a whole different approach.
Right, and I think that's why I want to tie it back into the summit, because I think what really this comes down to is like, if you have a toxic workplace, and I don't mean just environmentally toxic, but if you have toxic leadership, that's going to have an effect on the mental health of the employees. That's going to, when people leave the job, like they're going to take home that level of stress, and how do they handle it? And so there's a huge mental health component that ties into that.
Absolutely.
And then also just like companies really investing in their employees' health and wellness. Like I would think like a conscious leadership company would like have healthy snacks. They'd have a healthy work. They'd be able to support people in their workout routines.
They'd have green smoothies for breaks.
Yeah, or just like even just like allowing people to have yoga or meditation, or bringing mindfulness into the workplace. Like all these themes that we've been talking about throughout the summit. You know, I don't know how companies can do that, but I believe that in order for people to be healthy, it's not just what happens at home, but it's what happens in relationship. It's what happens within the workforce. And so really that's what you're bringing. And this is about shadow work today. So I just wanted to ask you, for everyone, like, what is shadow work and why is this important?
So as a joke, when I was 20 years old, a friend of mine said, hey, there's this, for lack of a better word, it was like looking back on it, was a shadow work course. You kind of do regression into your, you know, pre-5-year-old, you know, state, into somewhat hypnotic. And we did this program. I kind of did it for fun, something to do. I was living in Las Vegas. I was stationed in Las Vegas in the Air Force. And my buddy Paul was like, hey, let's do this. So we did this shadow work program. And I was just like, yeah, we'll just do something for fun. And then I did the actual process on him, and I couldn't believe it. I was just like, well, I'll just do the steps, and it worked. And next thing you know, he's like an infant in his mother's hands, and he's talking about, basically he can see the whole situation about the stresses. I won't get into the personal details, but he had a personal, there was some realizations about like how that has affected him his whole life. So what the shadow, so it kind of, the idea of the shadow comes out of psychology and Carl Jung. And he's like, well, there's that part of you, that personality, that's like the evil part, the repressed, dark, blah, blah, blah. And I kind of, you know, in my understanding, in my own personal work that I've done, you know, years and years of shadow work, I call it shadow work. I'd like to kind of give a different kind of explanation of what I think shadow work is. So I think we live in a spectrum. It's not black or white. We're not like perfect and then we're imperfect. It's like there's our best self is at one end, when we're being our absolute highest, call it the highest conscious vibration of who we are. Mm-hmm. And then there's maybe our worst self, or our not best self, or our other than our best self at the other end, which is our darkest moments. Our sad, grief, anger, these are the darker, the kind of the lower vibrational energies. Mm-hmm. And then there's our baseline. Where do we spend most of our time? And it probably looks for most people like a bell curve. Yeah. There's going to be our best self, our worst self, and then somewhere in the middle. Mm-hmm. And so we could talk about what is our best self. And in my mind, I really apply we're in Sedona, so at a hotel, and not far from here is where Dr. David Hawkins had his place. He's written a lot of books, but his seminal work is Power versus Force. He's also writing, his last work was Letting Go, which is an amazing book as well, especially for doing shadow work. And he has levels of consciousness. And I like this concept of, at the bottom, it's unconscious, and at the top, he calls it arbitrarily 1,000. So this is the framework for understanding shadow work, is that there are different levels of consciousness and levels of truth, and it's relative. So what's true at one level is not true at another level. And so we talk a lot about maybe the lower vibrational frequencies, which are anger and frustration, sadness, grief.
Despair.
And then you get lower, you get despair. And then the lowest of them all is apathy, which is like you're just so beaten down
Yeah.
that you've given up.
Yeah, it's almost but like when you've given up, is that like fawn stage, like for fight, flight, or freeze? Is that like fawn, or it's even?
Absolutely. It's just like in that moment you've given up. It's like that's fawn is when you're trying to, I would
You're
say
trying to make things like
yeah.
work for you, but
Yeah, fight is probably anger. Flight is, oh my God, I'm scared, I'm running away.
That's fear.
Freeze is despair. It's like, oh my gosh, I've given
but
up.
apathy is just, it's very much, I would think, a frozen state.
Yeah.
So then like that's like low level. Where's like since you talked about that bell curve, like what would be the middle range?
And that's
where maybe you kind of, I'd say most of us probably, like, we're not always on the high where we have our low lows, but most of us probably stay somewhere.
Yeah.
What?
I think it's just through your baseline where you are, and what makes your baseline different than maybe your highest state is it's kind of maybe a state of less than fully present consciousness. So for example, when you talk about this flow state where you're fully present and everything's working and you're fully, engaged, and you walk into a room and the room lifts up because of your presence, because you're really in your power. Right. And I don't mean it like masculine power.
Well,
I mean,
it could be masculine, but it's in a positive place.
It's in a positive high vibrational energy, and the room is instantly shifted. You know those moments when you have it, or those moments when people walk in and they're just really high vibrational energy.
Yeah. And I want to say to that, like, one of my missions, or if for my own personal life, but also as part of my practice and part of my teachings, is that we can like have peak experiences or be in flow state. Like we actually can have access to that more often than not. And I think that's the beauty of this work, right? Is that when we go into a process of purification, like you were saying, like the shadow work is a purification process,
right,
of the emotional body. And when we go through these purification periods, like when we dive into the work, what we think isn't possible becomes possible, and we can realize, oh my gosh, I can have lots of peak states. I can be more in a state of flow than not in a state of flow.
Yeah.
And
the idea behind shadow work is you take, you've got this normal place where you live, you got your highs and you got your lows, and you want to bring your highs higher, you want to bring your middles higher, and and your shadow work is getting the worst aspects of yourself and bringing them up. So everything lifts.
Yeah.
And so your trend is upwards as you evolve, as you grow, as you do the shadow work, it's a lot about letting go. It's a lot about, so let's talk a little bit about
right.
And
I was just thinking, like, because we actually had a conversation with a friend last night, and the shadow work came up as a conversation. And the way I think of it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I like to think of it as like, honestly, it's very informative, at least for me. Like, it's not something that you want to avoid, because if you avoid it, the growth can't happen. Like, your spectrum of growth becomes stalled if you're not looking at your shadow work. So it's not something to be avoided. However, I was saying in my conversation, I don't choose to stay in that energy, but I'm willing to sit within the fire of it. I'm okay saying, okay, here's where my shadow work is, and I have to confront it, but it's not something that I necessarily want to stay in, not because I'm avoiding it. But interestingly enough, I believe that some of the biggest transformation, the biggest growth can happen by working with your shadow.
Absolutely. And in Eastern medicine, there's a lot of Eastern philosophy, there's a lot of paradoxes. The Western mind is very linear and very likes to lay everything out and make sense of everything. And the Eastern mind allows for this concept of paradox.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, for example, if you want to hold on to something, you've got to let it go.
Mm-hmm.
And the Tao Te Ching talks about to move fast, you go slow. And it's this whole like, what the heck is going on?
Yeah.
So with shadow work, it's like the yin yang. In the darkest aspect of your shadow, your core wound is your enlightenment, is your dharmic path, is your highest self. And in the highest aspect of your highest self, there's an aspect of your core wound in your shadow. So let's talk a little bit about what shadow is. Explain. You're talking about avoiding it or not avoiding it or staying in it.
Well, honestly, I believe that some of our greatest suffering can be our biggest teacher.
Of course.
So
that's
like you said, like the dark, like in the dark you find the light. It's like you have to go through the tunnel to come out on the other side to see the light.
Right.
And we were taking some quotes like last night or this morning about, what did you say about like if you allow your shadow to be behind you or in front of you, what were
so I think about your dharmic path. Why are you here? What is your purpose? What is your mission? And some people are just surviving. They're just like, I don't care about any of that. I just got to pay the bills.
Yeah.
And we know, and the studies show that there is a certain amount of security necessary so people can kind of get out of that perpetual PTSD kind of survival mode. If you're not quite, the wolves are at your door and the collectors are, and you're not quite making ends meet, that's stressful. And so just survival. But above that level of survival, you're paying your bills, things are good, the more money and success that comes doesn't bring any more happiness. Mm-hmm. So you need a certain level of security to feel good, but beyond that, there's more to it. And so people who really find themselves very successful in that sense
doesn't mean that they necessarily find happiness.
Happiness. So to me, you're talking about light and shadow. What is it you're here for? What is your dharmic purpose? And that to me is going towards your light. The high vibration, light frequencies. And when you're walking into the light, the shadow's behind you.
That was what it was. Yeah.
And so when you're walking away from your purpose, when you're walking away from your light, the shadow leads. Mm-hmm. And so is your shadow leading? And so let's talk a little bit about this because it's so interesting to me.
It is interesting.
What makes people go, so we have this flow state, we have this energy, and then you know when you're in this other state where you're in fight, flight, anger, and usually the higher vibration of fear is anger. Anger is a higher vibration than fear. So in your core wound, and so let's talk about shadow. What is it? How does it get there? So to me, I have this idea that we are energy beings. And you know this because you work on people and you work on energy, and things get stuck. And they get stuck in the physical body, but be almost one of the kind of the understandings of all people who do physical work is they'll say there's some spiritual issue behind the physical. Mm-hmm. And that's the shadow, that's the core wound. The shadow work is finding those core wounds. So we all have core wounds, some people worse than others. Or
it could be they just worked on them. They've addressed them.
They're
working with, they know that they haven't fully arrived, but that they're very conscious of where their work lies.
And I don't judge it because for me, we're all here to grow and evolve. And I like to think of it as people with a lot of core wounds, maybe they've chosen that to really work on their stuff. It's like when you play video games, you start off, you're on easy mode, but then easy's too easy. So you go into a different, average and then difficult and then super difficult because you want to have fun. And so we're here in this lifetime, we're here to have fun, we're here to work on our stuff. So people who have a lot of core wounds, maybe they're more spiritually advanced and they're just playing at a higher level. I don't know, I don't really like to judge it. I just like to accept the fact that that's what the earth plane is. It's this place where people come. I've never met anyone without core wounds.
Well, I mean, interesting to that point because I think there's this idea that once we address it, everything's going to get better, but actually sometimes things have to get way worse. And what I mean by that is like when we start to pull the layers of the onion, it's like, oh shit, like what have I discovered? Yeah. And it can be like that dark night of the soul, or it can be like everything has to fall apart in order to come back together to rebuild in the right way. Because once you peel away that and you get to see what's there, it might be some funk and you might have to be like, oh, this has to go and this has to go or this has to change. It's like, or I'll give an example. Like you're talking about dharma or life purpose,
Yeah.
your job, right? If you're not aligned, it's not feeling right, you're not feeling in flow, then all of a sudden it might be like, oh, I might actually have to change my job. And that means risking that security.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting because I asked myself, why is this so hard? Right? What is going on? Why, in another context, why do women embrace it more than men? In just the spiritual kind of places I've been, it just seems that women tend to show up and are willing to do this shadow work more than men. So I've been asking myself, why is that? And so my understanding and the way I kind of understand it is, we have these core wounds and we repress them. We push them down into our subconscious. And why? And in my experience of my own shadow work and helping other people with their shadow work is, there's something about it that is so scary that we are not ready and willing to look at it. And that's why we repress it. There's something about it. And here's the other part that we have to really accept, is it makes no logical sense. Because our brain, so we have the intellect, the neocortex, the part of our brain that explains things, that says this is why and this is what happened and blah, 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 blah. But as we know, anyone who's just done any kind of marketing research knows, we like, if you're going to buy something, you choose emotionally and then you intellectualize.
Right.
You're like, you really want the red car.
But it comes from an emotional, like,
from an emotional
first.
space. So what we do is we repress these emotional wounds. Why do we do that? The only explanation I really feel is that there's some reptilian, part of our brain that has equated this, whatever this wound is, to death. And we will fight to survive. And our understanding of the way consciousness works and subconsciousness is our brain doesn't really develop till we're like 7. And anyone who's had children knows, like, once they get about 7, 8 years old, you can start having some interesting conversations with humans at that age. But before that, it's really more emotional and simple conversations. And the understanding of consciousness and subconsciousness is before the age of like 5, anything that's kind of coming in, any kind of stress in that life. And it could just be, how do we negotiate the world? How do we, especially, for those of us in this world who are choosing the path of higher vibrational frequencies, as a children, we might have been asking the wrong kind of questions and we learn to dim our light because it made other people feel uncomfortable. And so we have all these survival patterns. And I'm a software engineer, and I really like to think of it as, these are programs that we have been programmed to survive in this world. And that's how we do it. And they get imprinted before the age of like 5, 6, or 7, when our intellect isn't really functioning and everything's coming into a kind of a subconscious place. So the stuff that is really scary, the stuff that really is traumatic, we repress it and we create a program to survive. And then later, when similar environmental situations happen, that stuff can lay dormant for decades. And sometimes it comes out when we're young, but sometimes it can lay dormant until we're adults, these little programs. And then at some point, this program, the environment, somebody reminds you of your person or something, and all of a sudden this gets triggered, and now we're not in our full present person who we are at that higher end of our functioning. Something happens and we get triggered. And everyone knows what it means when you say, I'm triggered, right?
Yeah, I think that it's something that you can, I guess the reason it can go dormant is that one thing, like, you learn ways to survive, which is one, but also coping mechanisms, like you can use shopping, you can use porn, you can use cannabis, you can use alcohol, you can use sex, you can use all of these things that can keep it kind of at bay.
Keeps it at bay. You have these issues, you have these core wounds, you're not willing to address them. You're not willing to connect with them. And there's no safe space to connect with them. And so in the lack of connection, we have these addictive patterns. And all addiction, the latest research shows that all addiction stems, the root of it is lack of connection.
Right. And like one of the things that everyone's going through, I mean, I think we can speak for everyone, is that we get on our devices and we can lose ourselves for hours or minutes or, for long periods of time, like escaping and thinking we're connecting, but we're not. So it's like, you said, there's this part that learns to survive, but then there's also, I think, a part that learns how to manage it.
How to manage it. Yeah. Managing these triggers. So at some point, so we get triggered, right? So
everybody gets triggered.
Everybody gets triggered. And I'd like to think of it as, is it basically normal triggered, or is it something that's triggering a core wound? So shadow work, the first step is awareness. The first step is consciously understanding that the situation I'm in right now is not me. It's not my higher self functioning. It's my lower self. Mm-hmm. So for example, if somebody does something to you in that moment that's not cool, you get angry. Mm-hmm. That might be normal behavior, like a normal response. Mm-hmm. But then there's the thing where that comes out, especially in relationships, because a lot of these triggers happen in the family of origin scenarios.
At the workplace, it can happen at home, it can happen with family, it can happen in a relationship. But yeah, there's specific places where you're spending a lot of time and connection where these things come up.
And the core wounds are fundamentally the same. It's, am I safe? Am I loved? Am I valued? Mm-hmm. And that's the core wound of pretty much everyone. Mm-hmm. And so there might be these programs, for example, I can tell you some of mine, which were when I was younger. If those of you knew me, I had a very difficult time ever being wrong. Mm-hmm. Because to be wrong, as I did my shadow work, I had this, the equation is everything equals death. So to be wrong meant death. So I couldn't be wrong ever. And that was my father had that wound too. So I kind of took that on. And that's the shadow work makes you realize this isn't me. Mm-hmm. This is my program. Mm-hmm. And the awareness is just feeling into what's going on. And so we have this intellect. I can intellectually like, wow, I am responding abnormally angry to this situation. And then you can look at it, you kind of step outside and you witness. That's kind of step one. It's just you're bearing witness to the situation as if you're watching it like a movie. And you just simply ask yourself, is this my highest self?
I call it taking inventory.
Taking inventory is like, okay, what's going on right now?
Yeah.
Is this really true? And the Byron Katie method is kind of steeped in this basic concept of, is what you're thinking really true? And I like to kind of take it to a different level and say, is it true because it's your higher self and your highest truth, and you check in and you're vibrating at a high frequency and you're feeling, yes, that's true. No, that's not true. Or are you triggered and you've got this program running? And you can identify it because it's generally a pattern that's happened for a long time. If you've had lots of friends and family and relationships keep telling you the same thing over and over and you're not willing to hear it.
Well, that's usually when you know it's your shadow. It's like people oftentimes will say, why do I keep running up against the same relationship or the same job?
Bringing in the same.
And so it's like, oh, if you see that patterning happening over and over again, you're like, why? That's kind of that victim consciousness, like, why me, or why is this happening to me? But it's like, if you're seeing that pattern reemerge, then there's clearly something informative in that's telling you, okay, this is coming back again and again and again to teach you something.
And the funny thing is, the irony is, when you realize, oh my God, this is my shadow, everyone around you goes, yeah, we've all known for years.
Yeah.
Everyone knows.
Yeah.
It's like it's right in front of your face, but you're like, where's my problem? And you're moving it aside and you're pushing it, because the way I like to think of it is we have these core, dark, stuck energies, and they're really scary, and they equal death for some reason. And so we have that, and then we have this protector, guardian energy that will guard that. And that protector is very clever, especially if it's one of those core wounds that have been around for a really long time and you haven't survived well. You've got a protector that's really making you unaware. It's like a scotoma. You really have it's the thing everybody knows but you, and you legit don't see it. And that's the shadow work.
That's where you literally everybody else sees it and you can't. And that's
just
like, okay,
can't.
it's like literally in the shadows of like your own consciousness,
That's
your
right.
own awareness.
And the shadow work is going, okay, the brighter the light, the darker the shadow. So if I'm gonna really look at this, you've got to decide, am I willing to sit in that fire? And that's, I think, the second step. First of all is the awareness that it's there.
But I also think that it blocks people from like if it's something that they're not seeing, right? Like they're just not seeing it, but everybody else seeing it. It may block them from what they really, really want, and especially when we're talking about conscious leadership, like things that cannot move forward. We've talked a lot about this in Ayurveda. It's tamasic, it's inert. It's that is where the shadow really is. It's dark. It's inert. It's cold. It's damp. It has this energy that doesn't move. And so that's like, okay, there's really like in Ayurveda or yogic philosophy, the veil, it's the Maya, it's the illusion. And so a lot of us get trapped in the illusion because we can't see it. We literally, like, the veil has not been lifted. But then, like you're saying, you get into the shadow work and it's like, oh my God, the veil is lifted. And it's like, ooh, should I shut the curtain really quick? Like, oh gosh, like just you just shut.
The longer you live on this planet, if you're doing any work at all, like, the things you can fix easily, you fix. And then what's left is the stuff that's really deep. And it manifests. It will come out, and as a physical body worker, you know that it manifests in all kinds of ways depending on the situation. And the ancient wisdom knows, oh, if you've got something in this, and I don't know the physical part of it, if you have something manifesting in this physical body, that's anger issues, that's fear, that's sadness, that's grief. And it manifests in those equivalent, associated body parts. And so
Ayurvedically, like, that's the thing. It's like, if somebody comes in with a symptom, then I really sit with, okay, let's say it's in the liver, like we're talking about anger or the spleen or the gallbladder. It's like, okay, if this is in an organ where anger resides, then I start to like look at, where did this manifest? How did it manifest? And then we can start to like try to, again, peel away the layers of the onion through that purification process. But one of the things you and I've talked about is like, there are times where we're moving through our stuff and things are changing and things are shifting. And then all of a sudden we just abandon ship. It's like, okay, like I got, I was losing 20 pounds, or all the inflammation or the redness out of my face went away, or, and then you get 2 or 3 months into the work and it's like, okay, like I'm just going to close this door.
Because you're getting close.
Because you're getting close to like unearthing something.
Yeah, you're digging in, you're kind of letting go, and then suddenly you're starting to touch the core wound.
And a lot of times I was telling Chris in my practice, what happens is I'll get in there with people and we're about 2 to 3 or 4 months in and we are making success. And then it's like, okay, I'm done. I've arrived. But like I tell my clients, like, that's why you have to be in the process a bit longer, like, because you have to go through all the seasons. You have to go through, it's like an edge. You come up against an edge. And I always call it your growing edge. But it's like a lot of times when we hit our growing edge is right when we hit it is when we stop. And that is where the beauty lies. Like if you hit this curve, like, and you're like, okay, I can't go beyond this, like the top of the mountain, or like we were hiking the other day. It's like, I can't go any further. I was like clinging to the ground. So usually like metaphorically, it's like when we're like that frozen or scared to move forward, or we're in denial of it, that's where the beauty is. Like that's where the next growing edge is. That's what's going to take you to the next.
It's like you've unearthed some of this, you've compressed the earth around those core wounds. Now you've kind of loosened the earth a little bit, and you're starting to touch a little bit of that, and it gets really scary. I also like to say this. When you work out physically, what do? You basically work the muscles really hard. You stress the physical body, and then you rest.
Yeah.
And so I think it's okay to love yourself enough to say, I've done some work.
Yes.
And now I need to, holy shit, I got to step back. Kind of we call it processing or integration. I was about to say that, integration. And that's when most people go, I've had enough, and they abandon ship. That's the time when it's a good opportunity to do some shadow work.
I think this is so important. This is so important because I love what we just touched upon. if you go beyond your capacity, the nervous system cannot handle it. So what happens, that integration period, we talked about awareness, is you come up against something and then the nervous system is like, oh my gosh, I literally don't have the capacity for this. And so either you abandon ship or you do that integration period, and then that gets integrated and you can do the next step. So that might take time. And what I love about Ayurveda, the process that I work with, is that Ayurveda doesn't tell you to go from here to here. Like, you have to go through those integration steps. You can't get up here if you've been here. Yeah. If you try, you'll get there, but then you're just gonna like slide down the hill.
Slip back down.
Yeah, and so what I love about the shadow work and the work that you're doing is that like brings some awareness, but then there's this integration period, right? This integration of understanding what you're actually going through, and that can take some time.
Yeah. And so you kind of want to do both. So it's a holistic concept. So what do you do first? Do you clean up your diet, or do you clean up your emotional situation? Do you clean up your stress? It's like you do all of it. Everything affects everything. Mm-hmm. So as you kind of loosen the compressions around some areas, then it's like, okay, well, it's like a stool. It's like there's different. You kind of have to adjust all of it, like a tripod. As you're making one leg. So when you talk about the capacity, the capability of what you as a person, or I, or you, or anyone can handle. So imagine there's this circle. If this is everything I can handle, this is it.
It's a container.
It's a container of what I am capable right now in this moment of handling. And if you start putting stuff, and then there's stuff that's there's stuff way outside what we can handle, and then there's stuff that's just outside what we can handle.
People know that intuitively. They know, like, okay, I know I can handle this much right now, but outside of that, like, I mean, I have people in my practice all the time say, Paige, I'm willing to make these changes, but I'm not ready for this.
I'm not ready for this, and I hear this all the time. So one of the concepts is your capacity to handle stretches like a rubber band. Mm-hmm. And how does that work? Well, if you're going to stretch a rubber band, sometimes you get a brand new, maybe you have a thick rubber band, mm-hmm. and when you first get it, it's tight. It's like the waistband of your sweatpants when you first get them. But over time, what happens? It loosens. So the idea of I can handle this much, then you stretch, mm-hmm. and you come back a little bit. When you come back, you're not back to where you were. You've stretched and you've come back, and now you're a little bit bigger. Mm-hmm. And you stretch, and so that's the process. You stretch, and then you go, okay, hold on, I'm coming back, and that's the love yourself process. That's
my gosh! So yeah, the yoga, the pranayama, the meditation, the asana.
Do not shame, blame, guilt yourself for saying, I've stretched, now I gotta come back and take a break. That to me is where most people, they get blame, shame, guilt, they jump completely off the bandwagon.
I love that you said all those words, because that's what happens.
They go completely off because they feel bad. They're like, oh, I'm doing good. So they'll work out every day, or they'll get on some whatever pattern, and they're growing, they're great. They hit some stressor in life, mm-hmm. knocks them off. They feel bad about it and never go back. Mm-hmm. And so I think what you must understand is that is the process. Mm-hmm. The process is you stretch, and then you come back a little bit. Then you stretch more, and you come back a little bit. You stretch more. It's like when I was doing holistic nutrition, mm-hmm. I would say, and pick one day a week and focus on completely cheating the complete diet. If you only do that one day a week, it's not on. Tim Ferriss wrote a book called The 4-Hour Body, and he mm-hmm. talks a lot about this concept of if you only eat completely crappy foods one day a week, it's not enough if you're eating really good the rest of the time to throw you off. Mm-hmm. But what it does is it resets mm-hmm. everything. So I like to do that spiritually. It's like you do so much, and then just go out and do the thing. The thing is, it's like your highs become higher, and your lows become higher. So what constituted the lowest part of you, maybe you were gambling. And then maybe you just kind of do a little bit of gambling every now and then. So, but the stretches of time become longer mm-hmm. when you do those things are not your highest self. Mm-hmm. And the things that actually you do go up. So the focus is the ultimate trend is going up, but it's going to be an up and down. Just like nature, just like breathing. We breathe in, we breathe out. We expand, we contract.
It's spanda. Spanda is that evolutionary process. Like we can't get out of the laws of nature. There's expansion and contraction. And that is like the laws of the macrocosm. It's the laws of the microcosm. And so if you go into a process and you have that awareness that there's going to be an expansion period and then there's going to be contraction, but you stay in the process,
Stay in the
right?
process. That's the
Yeah.
key. The commitment, that's when I talk about the light. So
Yeah.
one of the things when people are doing this work, we have coping mechanisms,
Mhm.
right? We all have coping mechanisms to handle, like you said, gambling. What sometimes it's, it's basically I'm going to shut down my ability to just emotionally feel.
Right.
And men, I think, have a different. Women have different culture. You look at our culture, and a woman is supposed to be beautiful, and she's supposed to be this, and this is what our society tells us.
Mm-hmm.
Well, men have certain cultural things too, and one of the things we're taught, like it or not, is we suppress our emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just how you are as a man.
Which has kind of come full circle, which is what you were asking, is like why women are in this space versus men. And I believe that's like really the heart of, like as a boy, like don't cry, like don't show your emotions. So like coming back to like full circle, like conscious leadership is that, I don't know the answer, but I would say that there hasn't been a process or a safe space or a community, or I believe we're moving in this direction for men to enter into this spiritual space, to enter into this like exploration space. But it's just like we kind of came full circle back to that. So I just wanted to like reiterate that point that I think that men are needing a venue or a place for this process to unfold. Women come in circle. We are communicators, like our DNA. We know that they've studied, little girls versus little boys, and little girls start language or communication way before little boys do. And so it's like, it's intuitive for women to communicate their emotional needs, and there's been space collectively in the culture to do that, whereas men haven't necessarily had that.
Exactly. And that's just the reality, whether or not it's right or wrong. And there's, of course, the whole gender fluidity of what is a man, what is a woman. That's coming into question as well. And so we're opening up all these containers of like what you're supposed to do in society, what you're not supposed to. All that's being opened and saying,
we have a can of worms.
We have this can of, everything's being opened up, and everything can shift. So we're able to, in these this day and age, to ask the questions that we couldn't even ask. Maybe our parents couldn't ask. And what does it mean? What does it mean to cry as a man? But I think more importantly, we're looking as leaders to make changes, to shift, to grow, to be better. Not everyone, but for those who are, they're realizing, hey, I can only go so far, and then something is blocking me. And we hold these blocks, these emotional shadow blocks in our body. And one of the ways to access this is to start paying attention to what's physically happening. And so if I'm having a conversation, I can be mad, and I can be, in a sense, righteously mad. But I'm fully present. It's almost like I think of it as a coach who's maybe some coaches lose their shit, but like a lot of good coaches, and I was in the AirForce, there was good leaders. I've seen what good leadership is. And you can be angry as a leader, and you can kind of yell and scold, but it's not a trigger. It's like they're fully present. They know the message that they're delivering. They're like controlled. And I think that's kind of like when you talk about toxic masculinity versus conscious masculinity. It's like I'm in my power. I'm not just belittling people. I'm being very clear of what's okay. The boundaries are clear. What's not okay. And so that's the kind of what I would say the conscious masculine. The toxic masculine is when the shadow's coming out and it's driving all this kind of, and we're starting to, in a society, the society is shifting and saying, no, it's not okay. It's not okay to continue these unconscious patterns that are really driven by core wounds and shadow and ego. And so we're at a time now that it's really becoming more and more important. If our society is going to survive into the next iteration of whatever we're doing, the leaders of businesses, and I think of it as, corporate America has a responsibility to help wake up. I've been in spiritual communities, and there's a lot of talk and a lot of willingness in spiritual communities, but then you get into, as a business consultant, you get into corporate America, and it's scary. It's like, I don't want to go to a drum circle where dudes with long hair and beads and tattoos. Like this is kind of scary
Right.
for men who are not used to that. So
Right.
I think the idea of doing shadow work is going to be a very important step in helping leaders, men and women. I'm not just, but for me, I see the problem more in the men that I work with, just because of the nature of the work that I do and what's going on that I see.
Right. So, because we're kind of coming up on the hour, like what are you up to? What is the process like to work with you? And
Yes.
and then I also want to share a few things about what we're doing.
So I'm working with the company I'm creating is conscious leadership transformation, Rex Muto, which is literally Latin for leadership transformation. And we have programs we're putting together. We've got soul's agenda, core wound, reprogramming, pattern assessments. We have all these tools that we're using to help with this process. And it's a holistic process. Holistic just to me means everything affects everything. So doing the kind of the physical work of Ayurveda and also looking at the kind of it's spiritual work, it's subconscious work, it's shadow work, whatever you want to call it, being able to look at that and having the tools. What's really interesting about the expansion of consciousness, the fact that you have Ayurveda in Louisville, Kentucky, is this idea that consciousness is expanding and we're getting access to all this information and technology and healing at the time where the world is kind of moving faster and faster. Technology is growing. Things are shifting. Gender fluidity is happening. Everything's getting more confusing.
I always say it's needed now more than ever.
And there's
a
coming.
reemergence. Well, it's emerging because it's needed more than ever.
Exactly.
If we're moving at lightning speed, you talked about integration. Collectively, we are moving so fast. Collectively, especially this age of technologies, is only going to get like more and more advanced. AI right now, it's like blows my mind. As we get more and more advanced, we're moving so fast we don't even have an integration period.
Right.
It's like what are we actually going through collectively? So I believe the emergence of like Ayurveda and these medicines and these therapies and like shadow work is so important because that integration period, it's like we're moving at lightning speed and we're not integrating.
Yeah.
And so it's like we're desperate for this medicine. So there's conscious leadership in businesses, but kind of individuals as well who are like, okay.
Absolutely. Well, one of the things we're doing it in the VIP, and the VIP is $97. So just be upfront. This is if you get paid for it. We're going to have a workshop, an afternoon workshop, where I will talk. And my partner Shauna Pelton will talk about goal activation. We have a virtual vision board technology, proprietary technology that we created, and we'll talk about activating our goals for 2023.
Right.
So that's part of the VIP process of the summit. But if you want to work with me for free, you can go to rexmuto.com and there'll be more information in the link.
Yeah, and it's going to be a beautiful experience because Shauna, who's his business partner, and then I'm like his love partner, but with that process, it's like they're going to be working with the shadow work and the goal activation and those things. On the Ayurvedic perspective, it's like it's a toolkit for how to live life, how to alchemize life, how to live artfully. And so I think there's this beautiful synergy that we've created between the two. And not to do too much of a pitch for the VIP, but this is on the last day. We'll also be working with J&B Living, who does journaling. And so it's going to be like a deep dive into like, let's unearth some stuff and then see what you want to do with it. Like some stuff's going to come out. And we're going to unearth like goals and journaling. And then like Ayurveda is the process for that. So I'm just kind of inviting people in because this is the last interview of the last day. And also we're doing something really cool. In February.
What are we doing? Oh, the couples retreat.
Yes. Yeah. So Chris and I, we both decided that we wanted to be in a spiritual partnership, and
before we met each other.
Before we met each other, exactly. And then I guess you could say we magnetized each other and
attracted.
And because we're in a spiritual partnership and a conscious relationship, we're very cognizant about working on our own stuff. Like when we come up against the triggers, we come up against the blocks, like we sit in the fire. And so really like we put together a retreat for Valentine's weekend. It's going to be just outside of Louisville, Kentucky. And if you're anywhere seeing this and you want to come in February, we will be doing relationship polarity work, shadow work. I'll be bringing in my Ayurveda knowledge, Tantra, And
masculine, feminine energy, how that plays out in relationship dynamics.
yeah.
Once you understand what masculine energy, what feminine cosmic energy
Mhm.
is, you can see it play out and you can make better choices in how you want to navigate your relationship.
Yeah. And so anyway, so like we're very much excited to do our first retreat together with relationship polarity, tantra
Absolutely.
work, and finding spiritual partnership. And I would say you don't even have to have a spiritual partner. I think we can open up to people who just want to come and explore what that looks
Absolutely.
like, because there's a lot of inner work, that a ton of inner work that you have to go through to magnetize that partner that you feel is your equal.
Yeah,
And
and I can say in relationship to shadow work, I have the last year before I kind of prepared myself, what I realized is the shadow, the core wounds that were creating relationship dissidence in every single relationship I ever had to be fixed before I could step into a divine partnership. And that's what I spent the last few years working on, doing the deep shadow work to move through those blocks so that I could hold the space for the light of Paige, which I couldn't have done had I not done, the years of shadow work that I did to prepare for you, basically.
Yeah, so I guess we'll just end. We would love to have you join us in the VIP. Obviously, if you want more information about Chris, how can they find you?
RexMudo.com.
All right. Anything else you want to say before we end?
No.
No? All right, we're complete. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy this.
Except I do want to say,
okay.
You're amazing. This has been amazing.
Yes.
I do love how you hold the space for the summit, for each person,
Oh,
how you're
thank you.
completely present, how you've asked the questions.
Mm.
And it's been fun to watch.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate what you've done with this summit.
And it has been so fun. Like we got engaged like as the summit's been going on. So just like I have to say, this has been like a rich, fun time to be in the summit energy and be in the energy of the engagement and sharing this and putting our love and our alchemy out into the world, and hopefully work with some of you in the future. So.
And the bottom line is love yourself enough to know that you can grow.
Right.
To know that you value yourself enough to take those next steps. You are worth it. It is worth it. And hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you.